Welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee. I'm your host, Rick Alexander. You guys can interact with me or follow me at @RickAlexander_ or at the Morning Coffee Podcast on Instagram. Now, if you're getting a lot from this show, if it's changing your life or even changing the way that you look at your life, it would mean the world to me if you would head to iTunes and give us a 5-star review so that we can continue to climb the charts and get this information to more and more people. Over the last year and a half, I've focused my work on the story that we tell ourselves about our lives. Your entire life is a bit of a story that you're telling yourself. And if you could tell yourself a different story, you could probably change your life quite a bit. And so I did that work for the release of my newest book, which is coming out in early 2020. But getting excited for that release, I actually wanted to go through a lot of the information that I had learned, a lot of my notes, and synthesize it into maxims, which is what we're getting into today. I've got 21 maxims to maximize your life, and what these are is just things that seem to be true about the human experience, and if you could understand how they are true, you could understand how they could change your life. And so if you go to rickalexander.com, what you're going to find is if you click on articles, the maxim of the day is going to be posted, whatever the last maxim was, and it's also going to have journal entries and thought experiments in there so that you can figure out how to apply these things to your own lives. And so a bit of an interactive experience. So throughout the next year, through my speaking, through my book release, and through these maxims, I'm excited to see how this information can really change the world and change your world if you give it an opportunity to. So part of my work has been to look at the different contributing factors that make a human being a human being. Because even though you're here now, you're actually the end product of billions of things. And while all of those things are no doubt incredible, they don't necessarily all serve us. And so it's important to figure out like what has contributed to make me who I am. Because if I know what's contributed, if I realize that there are certain things like I'm set up for experience in some way, and that's not serving me, then I'm at least free to pick new narratives and pick new things that actually are serving me, pick new behaviors, pick new thoughts. And so I think fundamentally that's the beauty and understanding that you have been set up to succeed in a world that you don't actually live in. All right. And so I want to go through some of the ways that is actually true. It's been my experience that if you can get your hands around what has contributed to your makeup, you're less likely to feel like you're a victim of circumstances that you don't understand. And that's the real problem with not understanding what has transpired to make you who you are. Because then you feel like you're at odds, like you feel like you're the victim of circumstances. It's like you're not the victim of anything. You just need to understand how you got how you are, like how you learned what you learned so that you can learn something different, so that you can pick a new path. Think about how many times you've tried to quote unquote change in the past and had it not really stick. It's not that change is impossible. People do it all the time, right? It's that we often don't know what it is that we're trying to change. So beyond the behavior, there's often a need. And if you don't figure out the right need, like the right motivation, it's likely that you won't be able to change the behavior at all. I remember recently I was talking about a friend of the family and how they're really trying to change their lives. And I just remember being like, listen, I don't want you to get your hopes up about this person changing, quote unquote, because they have no idea what they're trying to change, right? And it's easy to see in other people, and it's not always so easy to see in ourselves. And I totally understand that. I often see these like psychological concepts come up in other people, and I have so much trouble seeing them in myself. That's the nature of who we are and the egoic mind, so to speak. But I remember just telling people like, listen, he's not going to change because he's up against things that he does not understand. So he doesn't even know what he's trying to change. He has a need for validation through the egoic mind that until he goes through that ego death, that will remain persistent. And so regardless of what he says he wants up front, he'll actually make decisions that will feed into that need that he doesn't understand. And so with each level of analysis, you get a different picture of what's going on with somebody. So it's like you can look at the different needs, so to speak, that we're talking about here. First of all, we can look at the meat wagon, right? Just the body. That's the product of evolution. So remember one of my earlier points about us evolving to find meaning in our survival, but now are strapped with a different issue. What to do with our free time. So I'm not going to get into this one, so to speak, but just understand like you didn't evolve for the world that you're in, and that matters. Like you evolved to survive, right? What used to lend itself to meaning was survival itself, because that's what you spent your time doing. You were hunting and you were gathering and you were figuring things out. at the tail end, we're only at the tail end of our evolution because of our current, so to speak, moment in time. You were born in a place where technology was so extreme and it advanced so fast. The body that you have wasn't built for the world that you're in. And so it's important to understand that, because then if you gobble up all of these technological advances with reckless abandon, like I said in Burn Your Couch, my first book, then you end up in a place that's pretty far from ideal, or pretty far from where you want to be, because existence itself no longer lends itself to meaning. Now we have a new problem, which is what to do with our free time. Okay, so that's one way that you weren't set up for the world that you live in. Secondly, we can look at the psychological conditioning. We're raised for a world that we aren't necessarily in, right? And that's another product of this ridiculous advancement in technology that we've seen over the course of our lives. When you were forming, your parents were the arbiters of your world, and so whatever their view was most likely deeply ingrained in you, right? And so you have to understand the world they grew up in is not the world that you're in. There's so much, you can see that there's a lot of emphasis for constructs, right? There's a lot of emphasis put on your proper role being that you need to live out these constructs. And so maybe that's marriage, or maybe that's a mortgage, or maybe that's success in some way. But it doesn't matter. I think what really matters is that you have to understand that whatever beliefs they gave you, they don't necessarily lay perfectly over the world that you're in now. And so if you find that you're living them out and that your life isn't what you want it to be, then you have to understand that you now have to find a new way to be. That's your responsibility as an adult. You have to find what serves you. You can't live out your parents' world and then blame them for your entire life when things don't work out. You live it out long enough to see that the world you were raised in doesn't overlay perfectly on the world you're in, and so maybe you need new beliefs for the world that you're in. Maybe you need new beliefs about what people are capable of and what you're capable of. My first psychology professor said, this was great. He said, we all screw up our kids. We just don't get to know how. And so an easy example of this is when you see someone that needs to cause chaos to get attention. That may have been their world, but it doesn't mean that it is anymore, right? So maybe your parents ignored you, and so you did have to create some sort of drama in order to get attention. And you overlay that belief on the world now, and you find that you're going from drama to drama, but it's not really serving you. It's like, yeah, okay, so don't blame your parents for the person that you are. They just did their best in raising you in the world that they lived. And just because the world you live in looks a little bit different now, doesn't mean you don't have the responsibility to figure out what needs to take place in order for this to work out. I remember reading a study where, this was back in the 60s, where they said basically technology is going to progress so fast by the end of the 20th century that we're going to be in a point where the average human only has to work 4 to 8 hour work weeks, because that's where technology will pick up all that extra slack. What's interesting is technology has advanced far faster than that original prediction, yet we continue to hold on to our 40-hour work week as if it's some badge of honor or something like that. And it's like, well, that's not the world that we're in anymore. And so why are we dragging these old beliefs into this new world? And so for all of these reasons, I think before you judge the world that you're in, you got to analyze it a little bit. Are the beliefs that you're living out even setting you up to find any kind of success in the world that you're in? Or is the world that you're in far different than the one you were set up to succeed in? Because you were set up to succeed in the world that you grew up in. That just might not be the case anymore. You're set up to succeed in the world you evolved for. That just might not be the case anymore. So now the human skill is discernment, right? And we go back to the choices that you make. That's what's going to improve the quality of your life now, because all of these things exist constantly. Your ability is actually the thing that's going to separate you now, is just really good discernment. How quickly can you move through choices without getting bogged down by all of the possible options for what could exist, right? How quickly can you pivot from a belief that's holding you back to a belief that's serving you? This is the art of being human. This is where I think in the 21st century, we're going to find more and more success with people that can understand that there are new rules as you learn more, as you grow up more, as technology advances. The rules change. What's possible changes. What we think of as possible changes. And so we have to change with it. Otherwise, we end up unhappy because we're living out old rules in a new world. And they don't always overlay so successfully. And so the question to ask yourself is, what are the beliefs that you have that are no longer serving you in this new world? Those are the ones that you need to relinquish and let go of. Maybe you believed that in order to be truly successful as a woman, you had to raise kids and give up your own career aspirations or whatever, and just like sort of fall into the patriarchy. Or maybe you learned the opposite of that, right? But it doesn't actually matter what you learned. What matters is that you learned, and because you learned, it can be unlearned. And so you can figure out what actually serves you in the way that you want to live this life, not for some ultimate right or wrong or some ultimate idea of what you should be or what you should do, because those ideals will keep us trapped. We'll always feel like there's things we should do and things we should be. But figure out what you really want, and then figure out the beliefs that are keeping you from that thing. That's where your work is. Anyway, I love you guys. Have an amazing day. We'll chat later on Morning Coffee.